One thing about the season of waiting is that it's not a pretty place to be. It is one of the most heartbreaking and humbling places, especially as a servant of God. Hi guys, welcome to the Tas Talks podcast. I'm Tas. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're an oldie, you already know me, welcome back. I'm still working on an intro for my podcast. It's the same intro. Water cooler stop. That's the intro I use for my other channel, which is Fantastic. I'll link it down below. And based on the title of today's video, you guys already see that I am about to speak on the story of Sarah, which is Abraham's wife. I've been instructed to deliver this message over a week now, and the spirit of laziness and delay, they have been upon me. But as you can see, that's no more, because if you're watching this, that means I definitely recorded and edited and uploaded this video. And also it's way past midnight now. It's like it's like closer to 1 a.m. and that's when I'm recording this video, because one thing about God is that he gets you out of that comfort zone. And no matter what you do, you procrastinate, you've been lazy, you are being disobedient, he nudges and he nudges and he nudges. And when he's tired of nudging and giving hints, and you pray for confirmation and you've gotten it a million times over, when he's tired of you being delinquent and disobedient, he pushes you out of that comfort zone. He forces you out of that situation. And trust and believe me that I want to sleep very comfortably in my bed tonight. And because I want to sleep very comfortably, I am going to be obedient and I'm going to deliver this word, because I have been very disobedient and delinquent, as I was saying. So let's get right into this video. So before we begin, I wanted to share how this message even came about, and just my curiosity to dive in deeper into who Sarah is, other than being Abraham's wife, and how she's described in the Bible in Genesis as just a barren woman. She's more than that. So I was watching The Chosen, and if anybody knows me, they know that I am a big lover of The Chosen. It's one of my favorite series right now, and I just really love how they bring the Bible to life. They really cause the characters of the Bible to come to life. And I know I'm guilty of, when I read the Bible, it's like I'm reading it in abstract form, and I can be judgmental sometimes, because I'm like, why would the Jews do this to him? Why would Judas betray him? And why did they not believe in him? Obviously he was God. Forgetting that in that time, in those settings, if I was there, maybe, who says I wouldn't have acted in the same way? But because I'm here now in this present time, and I have something called the Bible that takes me from beginning to end, I am able to put all the pieces together. But in their time, they never had that. What they had were different scriptures and notes and scribes left from that were prepared by their predecessors, so like Moses and all those persons who came before them from the Old Testament. That's what a lot of them were relying on in the New Testament to, I guess, make some sense of what they're supposed to look forward to, which is the return of or the coming of Christ Jesus. Imagine that's the New Testament. Imagine in the Old Testament how it must have been for them. Then so I really like The Chosen, just bringing all of that together. And The Chosen did not sponsor this podcast in no way, shape, or form. I wish they did, but they didn't. But I just wanted to put that out there, because if you know me, you know I'm a Chosen girl. So anyways, let's move on. So while watching The Chosen, while watching His Only Son, which is another film by, I think, the same producers and everybody who are behind the production of The Chosen, His Only Son. It's the story of Abraham, and when he was being tested by God to go and sacrifice his one and only son, Isaac, on Mount, I can't remember the name, Moriah. I'll put it here if I'm mispronouncing it. And so, because as a child I remember the story as a child, and I had read the story last year, refreshing myself on certain passages in the Bible, I knew the outcome of that story would be that he wouldn't end up sacrificing his son, but that when he was being tested by God and he was obedient, and although this was hard for him, when he did get to the place that God told him to do the sacrifice, a substitute was instead presented, which was actually a lamb for the sacrifice to be performed. But God was just testing Abraham, and he passed with flying colors. So while watching the film, I knew what the outcome would have been, but again, I just love how the chosen members bring biblical stories to life. So watching it there, and I just started seeing Sarah in a light that I've never seen her before, or I never envisioned her, because hence why I was saying all of that before, with just how when I read my Bible oftentimes, it's hard to relate to biblical characters, especially because it's a different setting, different time, different everything. But for some reason, while watching the film last Sunday night, I saw so much of myself in Sarah that I never thought before. And I've read the story of Abraham before, and I remember it as a child, and I just never related to Sarah as I did the other night. And also, I feel like when a lot of persons tell the story of Abraham, Sarah is mentioned, but she's never given her own platform or an identity outside of Abraham. And I think Sarah has a story that's outside of her husband. Yes, they're married, and his actions and what God ordered him to do and promised him affected her, because we'll realize that their lives are intertwined. However, she was dealing with something far greater than what Abraham could ever deal with and understand, because he's a man. And that's just the story of being unable to bear a child, being barren, and the ridicule and embarrassment that came along with that. So let's dive into Sarah's story and do her some justice. I'm going to ask at the beginning of this podcast, how many of you, before I even get into it, if you know the story, you know the story, but how many of you are Sarah? How many of you currently are in a season of waiting? How many of you see yourself in Sarah? And if your answer is no, or you don't know, by the time I'm halfway through this podcast or I'm at the end, I'm going to pose the question again, and I want you to think of it differently this time. So we're introduced to Sarah in Genesis 11, and we learned that her name was initially Sarai. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, as also Abraham's name was Abram, but that was later changed to Sarah and Abraham in Genesis 17, 15, verses 15 and verse 5 respectively. And we learned that Abraham means father of many nations, and Sarai means princess, and later I think the translation the change to Sarah means the same, princess, and she's known as the mother of nations, right? But when we're first introduced to Sarah, it's dealing about Abraham's family, and she is introduced as she is as Abraham's wife, and immediately a picture is formed about her. It says, now Sarah, or Sarai, was childless because she was unable to conceive. So immediately her limitations are pronounced. It's been declared, and oftentimes that happens to us in this life when we are known by our shortcomings, and I feel like that's why a lot of times persons avoid like family gatherings, just meeting up with friends or whatever it is, because if anything, nobody wants to get up every day and be reminded of what their shortcoming is in this life. You know what it is, you don't need to be reminded of it every day. But Sarah is already introduced by her shortcoming, which is that she's unable to conceive a child. And not that she wasn't willing and able, she definitely tried several times over, but she was unable. Okay, so then we learn the call of Abraham, and this is in Genesis 12. Now when God calls Abraham, he's already 75 years old, and based on what I know, Sarah is 10 years younger, so she would have been 65 when God calls her husband. But in God calling Abraham, he's sending him out to go from his father's land, go from his family, his household, and go to a land that I will show you. So God is saying to Abraham, and in saying it to Abraham, he's also saying it to Sarah, because again, just as how I started out, they're husband and wives. They weren't in a long distance relationship. They weren't saying, oh, she wasn't saying, okay honey, you go and I'll stay here and I'll write me a letter every 3 months. No. God says, Abraham, get up and go from whatever you're familiar with. Go from these people that you're familiar with, this lifestyle that you're accustomed to, and go to somewhere that I will show you. He didn't even tell him where he was sending him as yet. He says, go on the journey and I will tell you where to stop. Basically, that was it. It's like he's saying, just drive. Just go on. Just drive. Get on that donkey and go. And I will say, stop here. Can you imagine what that was like? So he says to Abraham, do that. He's also saying it to Sarah. Go from whatever you're familiar with. At 65 and 75 years old, you both need to get up in this old age and leave. So Abraham obeyed, and of course he set out on this journey. It says he took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for a land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So we learned, and he built an altar and all of that to God. And then we learned that because of the famine that was so bad in Canaan, Abraham had to flee to Egypt. And in fleeing to Egypt, we learned that because his wife, even in her 60s, she was so beautiful that Abraham saw her beauty as a threat to his survival. So he devised a plan. And he looked at his 65-year-old wife, and he says to her, you're so beautiful, and because you're so beautiful, they're going to kill me if they find out. Pharaoh in Egypt, the king in Egypt, is going to kill me when he finds out that you're my wife. So say you're my sister, and because you're my sister, I'll be spared because of your beauty and because we're brothers and sisters. And of course she agreed. And when I read that part, or I reread it, I cannot imagine Sarah willingly jumping for joy and saying, yes, I get to be unfaithful to my husband. This man who at 65 years old, I've left all that I've known my entire life and gone out to this place that we never had any intention of going to. And then when we got to this place, famine happens, and then we had to go somewhere else, and knowing going somewhere else, this happens, and they're being forced into a new place. Can you imagine how hard this must have been for Sarah, not just physically but mentally, like the agony? So then we learned that because Pharaoh took Sarah as his wife, and of course took Sarah as his wife mean that they must have done what man and wife do. And so because again, when I read that part, I was like, I missed this at first, because at first I just read it and it was just like I glossed over it. But can you, like, when I was putting myself in her position, my husband says, pretend to be my sister, because if you do, my life will be spared, because you're so beautiful. And I agreed. Reluctantly I agreed, because I'm like, okay, we need to survive. We can't go back to Canaan because of the famine. So we're gonna bounce it out in Egypt for a little while, and we're gonna cook up this plan. But in cooking up this plan and making it work, I must give myself to another man. Wow. So when I read that part, I was like, okay, so because he took her as his wife, we learned that God inflicted a disease upon Egypt. And when Pharaoh learned of the truth behind the relationship between Abraham and Sarah, he called Abraham forward and said, hey, why you lied to me? And Abraham said, well, you know what, my wife is beautiful, and I know that my life would not have been spared if you knew she was my wife. So Pharaoh said, listen, God is no God to ramp with, so take your wife and take these things and be gone. So then we fast forward to the Lord making a promise to Abraham in Genesis 13 verses 16 and verse 16. And during this promise to Abraham, the Lord says, I will make your offsprings like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offsprings could be counted. So basically your offsprings would be countless, infinite, basically is what the Lord was saying. So then we fast forward to Genesis 15, where after that promise was made by God, some time has passed. Now it's Genesis 15. The Bible doesn't really say how much time transpired in between, but clearly it was some amount of time, because Abraham now is looking around, and I'm sure him and Sarah, even in their old age, they're trying, because one thing with Abraham, he believes God, he loves God, he's a faithful man, and he believes God. So God says your offspring will be countless, numerous. He says, okay, but some time has passed, Lord. So when I look around, and my wife and I have been trying, I see no heirs, I see no offsprings, my wife is still unable to conceive, and now I'm troubled because I believe that all my possessions will only be left to this male servant that I have. So Abraham is saying that to the Lord, and it says that the word of the Lord came to him and told him that this man, this servant, he will not be your heir, but a son who is of your own flesh and blood will be. So we learn that God took Abraham outside and says, count the stars. He instructs him to count the stars if he could indeed count them, and the Lord says, so shall your offsprings be. So your offspring shall be as numerous and as countless as the stars in the sky and the dust of the earth. And guess what Abraham did? He believed him. He believed him. And I'm sure, so when I reread this part, I'm thinking, here is this man already 75 years old, and God has called him. Some time has transpired. He hasn't gotten any younger. He isn't getting any younger. But not only is Abraham aging, Sarah is aging. And if anything, biology teaches us, and we all know that when a woman ages, so does her reproductive organs. So even when a man is able to get a child through a woman at a certain age, in their old age, us women, time is not that favorable to us. Time isn't on our side. As the more we age, you're far beyond childbearing years. You know, it's impossible to conceive at this point based on biology. Can you imagine how embarrassed she felt? So I just felt so sorry for Sarah. I just felt so sorry. And while reading this, I was like, how did I miss all of this? But then I gave myself grace, because I feel like for a long time Sarah's story has been foreshadowed by Abraham's call and Abraham's work and obedience, where everybody just saw her as this what's that word that I'm looking for? Auxiliary staff, auxiliary help, whatever, addition, I don't know. This person that Abraham, I guess, wanted but didn't need. And then a lot of her identity and again her story was foreshadowed by her husbands. And I feel like a lot of women, that happens a lot of times with us, where it's like immediately as soon as you even get married, your identity is lost in your husband. And if you don't really push hard or try to feel like, you know, it's like, so anyways, I just resonated a lot with Sarah. I just felt so sorry for Sarah. Honestly, I just felt so compassionate for her, because imagine this man in his old age, you in your old age, him come home tell her this, oh honey, I spoke to the Lord again today, and he said this. I'm gonna look at him and be like, are you crazy? Are you mad? We have been trying for years, decades, and we haven't conceived. Why would I be getting closer up in age to my 80s and we're not gonna conceive? You know what I mean? So now we're at Genesis 16, and it's the story of Hagar and Ishmael. So Hagar was Sarah's servant. She was Sarah's right hand, and Ishmael is her son. How Ishmael came about is literally what happens to all of us during our waiting season, our time of need, when we feel as if God has turned his face from us. He's made promises to us that he has yet to keep, and so we do what Sarah did. We take matters into our own hands because we're desperate. Desperation is not a pretty place to be in a season and a time of waiting, when you know that the promises, you know that the things you're envisioning, the things that are on your heart, you know there are promises made by God. This is not just you waking up and being like, oh, I'm gonna manifest this life, and I need this and I need that, and I need. No, what you are waiting on is the promise of God saying, I will heal you. This is your breakthrough. Your breakthrough will happen. I will bless you. I will heal you. I will have those who were laughing after you laughing with you. I will heal your sick child. I will heal your financial situation. I will heal your emotional situation. Whatever it is that you're going through. And I am speaking to myself. A lot of times people think the videos I make are for them, which they are, because I'm instructed to a lot of times, especially for this podcast. But trust and believe me, said, child, these are things I wish somebody was telling me in these moments, right? So you see, desperation, it's not a pretty place. It's really not a pretty place. Sarah was desperate, and because Sarah was desperate, she took matters up in her own hands, because here is her husband coming home every day saying, oh, let's continue waiting and trusting on God. But he can say that in his 70s, 80s, 90s and still be able to get a child through another woman. But as for me, Sarah, your wife, time is not on my side. And the older I get, the more impossible it becomes for me to bring a child to you. So Sarah says, all right, maybe God promised you a child through your flesh and blood. Who says I have to be the one to bring it? Here's a deal. Go and sleep with my servant Hagar. I am giving you permission, and maybe I will raise a family through her. And we learned that Abraham did go and lie with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she conceived, we learned that, okay, no animosity started to brew between master and servant, which is Sarah and Hagar, because I guess Hagar learned she's pregnant. She's probably like, I can do what you've been trying to do all these years. Hagar was probably like, girl, I have Mr. Abraham's baby in here. I can do in a few seconds what you've been unable to do in years. I don't know, I'm just saying, because animosity grew between them, and so it says there was conflict between them, and so Sarah started to mistreat her servant, and that caused Hagar to flee. But then we learned that, she was visited by an angel, and she was told to go back and give birth, and when she does, the child shall be called Ishmael. And Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86 years old. Okay, still Sarah is still waiting. At this point, I'm sure she's still clinging on to the hope of being a mother one day. But as time goes, her faith is dwindling. It's at the point where it's so minute. She's embarrassed. She's in shambles. I don't know. She's just going through so much, while I'm sure everybody is like, she's hearing the talks. So much is happening, especially when her servant got impregnated by her husband, I am sure that must not have been an easy decision to make, and something to just even live with thereafter. So okay, Abraham has his one son Ishmael, and they're there living their lives. And as much as Abraham is a faithful and obedient man of God, I too am thinking that at this point he must have, he's 86, God made his promises to him saying, your offsprings will be as numerous and as countless as the dust of the earth and the stars in the sky. If anybody can count these things, then they'll be able to count your offsprings, right? Which is basically saying countless. Because who can count the dust of the earth? And so when at 86 he got Ishmael, they're living their lives, and I'm sure he also grew content with the situation that you know what, I still trust and believe in God, but maybe this is what God meant, because he just says you're going to have your own flesh and blood, the servant that you had will not be your heir, all of that, yada yada yada. But let's be factual. I'm 86. I'm 86, and no, my wife is 76. Yeah, okay. Boy, one thing about the season of waiting is that it's not a pretty place to be. It is one of the most heartbreaking and humbling places, especially as a servant of God, when the flesh is urging you, take matters into your own hand, do this, do that, and you're saying be still, because you're waiting on God. When you hear the talks from close friends, family members, loved ones in general, persons you wouldn't even believe would be saying such things. When the doctor comes and says, oh, we found this on your results and we see this, and because this is the situation, based on what they know and science, this will be the outcome. And you're saying, God, you promised me that I would have lived to see this and I would have lived to see that, but here's a doctor standing over my bed telling me that I have a few months, I have a few years, I am diagnosed with this, that my child is diagnosed with this, that my financial situation won't allow me to even put food in my house to go any further. But yet I'm having dreams and visions of feeding nations, of starting a charity, of doing things far beyond my circumstances in the moment. It just seems impossible. It just seems impossible. But is anything impossible for God? So then at 99 years old, we learn that the Lord makes another covenant with Abraham, and this time it's a covenant about circumcision. And while he's informing Abraham about how males should be circumcised, we are learning that God has also made a promise to Abraham that he's going to have a child. So he's bringing up this promise that he has made a decade before, because it's a lot of time has transpired. But now God is not just saying during this season of waiting for these people, especially for Sarah, that okay, you're going to have your breakthrough, you're going to have this done, you're going to be healed, your financial situation will be fixed, everything. God is now doing for Abraham what a lot of us wishes happens during our season of waiting, because the thing is, we're flesh, and because we're flesh, we're led by flesh. But you see, when you take on the armor of Christ, you become a part of the body of Christ, you have to learn, and I'm speaking to myself here, we have to learn to be led by the Spirit. And it's hard, it's absolutely hard, and God knows it's hard for us, right? We're fleshly beings, and because we're fleshly beings, God says leave to Abraham, leave your father's house, everything that you've known, and go to a land that I will show you. He never says leave your father's house on this day and you'll arrive in Canaan by tomorrow at this time and you need to take 50 steps from here to there. He never said any of that. He just says leave. And when God says to you, leave that job, you're like, but how will my bills be paid? How will I eat? God says to you, leave that relationship, but how will I survive? I've only known of this person. He has been or she has been whatever. God says leave that situation, but how? God says leave that town, leave that country, leave that community, leave that group of friends, leave. And you're like, okay God, but then what's next? And then he goes silent, and then we start thinking, okay, that must have been me imagining things, but it's really not. You pray for confirmation a million times over and you've gotten it a million times over till God's sick of you. He's like, I'm tired of this child. What more confirmation do you need, Tas? No, for real. To the point where sometimes I'm like, I'm so embarrassed, like when I see certain things pop up on YouTube and I'm reading certain scriptures and it's like I'm being dragged, because I'm like, oh, let's skip over that because that's definitely God talking to me right there. I feel so embarrassed a lot of times. But no, for real, we want to know, okay, you told me to leave my father's house, you told me to leave the situation. How will I pay my bills? How will I eat? When will I get a new job? How will this happen? How will, we want to know. We want to know. And God says, do not ask me these things. Do not rely on flesh. Put your trust in God and everything else will be added after. Because one thing with him is that he will never leave you or forsake you, and he will never lead you down the path of destruction. So once you're counting on him and relying on him, you will overcome. You will overcome. No matter the naysayers and the ridicule that's happening around you, you will overcome. But so this time at 99 years old, God is saying to Abraham, you and Sarah have taken matters into your own hands. You have gone and got a child by the Bible never said God said all of this. This wasn't what is written. But I'm just like relaying all the facts leading up to this point. You've taken matters into your own hands. You've gone and got a child by Hagar because Sarah, ordered it or instructed it. Okay, you are going to have a child that is your own flesh and blood, your own son, and Sarah is going to be the mother, and by this time next year she will bear the child, and the child's name shall be this. So now Abraham and Sarah, they have a date working with, and they have the child's name, but the instructions never came so clearly in the initial stage. This is 10 plus years later. Basically, the passage says that when Abraham learned of this, he laughed because he just couldn't fathom a 90-year-old woman. He's almost 100. I remember Sarah is 10 years younger. He just can't fathom a 90-year-old woman bearing a child, her first child at that. So he laughed. But again, I just thought of Sarah at 90 years old. Imagine your husband come and say to you, because you know your husband is a righteous man and a man of God. So you know he's not out there imagining things, but maybe at some point it did cross her mind, like, I wonder if I'm mad, no, for real. But he comes to you and he says, honey, guess what? God says by this time next year, at 90, that's my water cooler. At 90, you're going to have a child and we shall name him Isaac. Sarah laughed because the Bible says, she says, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure, the pleasure of being a mom? And the passage goes on to say that how God basically reprimanded her for saying that, because God says, is there anything too hard for the Lord? You know, you have to ask yourself that sometimes. Is there anything too hard for God to do? Is the impossible for God? So Sarah lied to say that she didn't laugh, and that's only because she feared the Lord. But she did laugh. So Sarah went on to have her son Isaac at the time when God said she would have him. And at this time Abraham was 100 years old, and it says Isaac means he laughs. And Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. So remember, her mindset has now changed from they're laughing at me, I'm being ridiculed. Basically, I'm the laughing stock of this village, of this town. Even her servant Hagar passed our place with her. Everybody feels like, oh, this old barren woman, you know. And can you imagine the back then it wasn't like now, where us women, we have more of a right to say, okay, it's more common now for women to be like, I don't want to be a mother, I don't want to have children, it's just not my thing. Back then it was like a rite of passage. Your womanhood was put to the test of whether you could bring forth a child or not, you know. So she's now saying they will laugh with me, and God put them to shame. And then it says in Genesis 21 verses 6 to 7, he says, and we read where Sarah says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. And then the passage goes on to say that Sarah died at age 127. So basically she was only a mom for 37 years, but she had the pleasure and the joy of all of that. So again, I want to ask at this point, the question I first posed, who sees themselves in Sarah? Who are the Sarahs out there who during the season of waiting, the ridicule, the embarrassment, you lose hope, where we feel like the season of waiting is basically a form of punishment? Who are the persons who are in a season of waiting where we have taken matters in our own hands? We feel like enough time has passed. We feel like God has turned his back on us. We feel like we haven't been hearing from him. He's silent. Why is he so silent? Don't he see our situation, our suffering, our long suffering? Like, he's all knowing. He knows this, he sees it, yet it's like we feel so abandoned and neglected by him, you know. As his children, we're like, Father, just look at me, just give me a second of your time, please. Literally, I'm yearning. But I want us to take from this story that God is always faithful on his promises. He delivers on his promises. He may not tell us the when, the in between. We will not know the beginning, the middle, and the end before we go on the journey he has called us to go on. But he is faithful on his promises. If he promises you something, it will come to pass. Also, that the wait, it's worth the wait. Because we see that even though Sarah tried to have a family through her servant, which was Hagar, it wasn't as fulfilling, and it just never happened because of the animosity that started from the mothers, which was Hagar and Sarah, and then between the boys when Isaac came into the picture. So Genesis tells us that Abraham had to get rid of Hagar and Ishmael to get them out of the picture when Isaac came about, because it just couldn't work. You know what I mean? And Isaac is who God has been waiting on to go and fulfill certain prophecies. It just shows that it's worth the wait. Taking up the situation in our own hand, feeling like, okay, God has turned his back on us, we have to do this ourselves. We're survival instincts kick in. No matter what is happening in your life, no matter the situation you're in right now, how external factors might be, you know, just rocking you left, right, and center, just keep focused and just steadfast on this journey that you are with God. And again, just remember that he will deliver on his promises. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to Tas Talks. I really enjoyed speaking with you guys today, and I'm definitely going to be more consistent for 2024. And pardon my manners, but I should have wished you guys a happy new year when I started this video, because this is my first episode for 2024. So happy new year to you all out there. And yeah, let's just look forward to meeting again more often like this for the rest of the year and for the future. Bye.